The theory of evolution is taught in education systems all around the world. It is found in textbooks, in videos, even academic papers and journals. So the question is, why is this video titled The Absurdity of Evolution if it's true? Well, stick around as we look at the 4 elements of evolution and we see that only 1 out of the 4 has ever been observed. What is evolution? I think most people will assume evolution is natural selection plus genetic mutations which over time result in changes in the genetic makeup of an organism. But that's not actually the big picture. Evolution is actually broken down into 4 key elements, which we're going to look at in this video. These 4 elements are stellar and planetary evolution, which is the origin of the stars and planets. Second is organic evolution, the origin of life from non-life, also called abiogenesis. Third is macroevolution, which is changing from one kind of animal into another kind. For example, apes to humans, which is also called biogenesis. And the last one is microevolution, which is essentially variation within the kinds. For example, you might have long-haired dogs, short-haired dogs, long-legged dogs, short-legged dogs, etc. Now, let me ask you a question. Which of those 4 components of evolution has been observed? Well, you may have guessed it, it's the 4th one, it's microevolution, or variation within the kinds. This has been observed, so this is actually true. So when creationists are asked, do you believe in evolution? They should say, yes, but what do you mean by evolution? Because there are 4 elements, and that's, I think, is crucial to clarify. There's 4 elements. So zooming in on microevolution briefly, Charles Darwin, when he was researching and observing in the Galapagos Islands, he noticed that there were what he thought were finches. It turns out they are, I think they're tanagers. They look similar, but in the order of passerine. So he saw these birds. Let's just call them Darwin's finches. Just that's what most people call them. Now he noticed that even though they were very similar, they closely resembled, there were different groups of these finches. Some of them had slightly larger beaks. Some had smaller beaks. Maybe the size of the body and the head was slightly different. But they were quite similar. There were far more similarities than differences. And he put forward the idea that over time and under different conditions and situation, then changes can happen within the species. Not immediate in the same generation necessarily, but certainly in subsequent generations, depending on the situation and depending on the genetic expression of different offspring. Because as we know, not all people are the same, not all offspring are the same. So in these birds, some of the birds may have had bigger beaks, and that would have been useful to feed on the larger seeds or the larger berries, or I don't know if there's nuts, probably the larger berries. Now, other birds over time had smaller heads and smaller beaks. This was advantageous for finding smaller berries or food that is small in nature. So perhaps naturally, those that had smaller heads or smaller beaks, certainly beaks, over time, they became specialized at finding, finding the berries and other smaller fruit. So, and that makes sense. That's logical. It's like if a dog has long hair and it moves into colder climates, it's going to have a much greater chance of surviving over subsequent generations, of having a long-lasting, gene pool for long-haired dogs in that region. Similarly, if a dog goes, a dog that has short hair, it's going to be certainly more thriving if it's in a warmer nature, a warmer climate. So yeah, that makes sense. That's observable. To solidify the idea of natural selection, we need to zoom in on the Industrial Revolution, which in this case, we can look at Manchester in England. Now, in 1811, there was a account, I guess you could say, a study or account of what's called peppered moths. Now, the majority of the peppered moths were the white peppered moths. These were white with black markings, but predominantly white. Now, there are also black peppered moths, which were mainly black with some white or grey markings. But essentially, there were two types of peppered moth. There was the white peppered moth and the black peppered moth. Now, in 1811, in Manchester, the majority of the moths were white peppered moths. But then, around 1850s approximately, this is during the time of the Industrial Revolution, when it was just taking off, by about 1858, something like that, the number of black peppered moths had significantly increased. And by the end of the 19th century, by about 1895, 90 or 95% of the moths, of these peppered moths, were black peppered moths. Now, what could account for such, in less than 100 years, almost reversal of the success of the peppered moth population? Now, I mentioned before it was the Industrial Revolution. Now, although it brought about great economic benefits, it also brought about some terrible pollution issues. In the factories, a lot of smoke was being, pumped into the air, and there was a lot of soot as well. Now, as this soot was spread, the wind would carry it around into the woodland surrounding Manchester. The soot would actually accumulate on the trees. So the trees the tree bark, in particular, they would all be covered in soot because of all the factories just spewing out all this smoke and pollution. So the white peppered moths against the black, the black background were such easy targets for predators. So naturally, if the predators could see them more easily, then they would be picked off. So in Manchester, the populations plummeted over less than 100 years, almost to zero. Now, of course, if it's a black peppered moth against a black sooty background, predators would find it extremely difficult to find these moths. That's why the black peppered moths, always became 100%. Now, interestingly, in Dorset in England, where there was no pollution, almost little pollution, the higher number of peppered moths was the white peppered moths. So yeah, that's environmental factors and other condition situations. Yes, that can impact the success of a creature, of an animal, of a species. We can see that. So now let's look at the other three, which are the stellar and planetary evolution, the organic evolution, and macroevolution. So first off then is stellar and planetary evolution. If the Big Bang is true, assuming it's true, let's go with it, and it could be. Assuming the universe is 14 billion years old, and assuming that there was a Big Bang, and the planets and the stars and the whole universe just somehow ended up the way it is. Why? How? Why do we have life? Why do we have all this seemingly complex order and design in the universe, not just in the cosmos, but also in nature? But we'll look at that in a moment. But let's just look at the cosmos. Why did the universe begin? How did it begin? Can it be due to natural causes? Well, from a philosophical perspective, it's looking rather slim chances that the cause was a natural cause, because we know that the space-time continuum began at that Big Bang. So time, space, and matter didn't actually begin until the Big Bang. It can't be a natural cause, or certainly it's implausible. I mean, it's possible technically, but it's implausible. It's a natural cause because everything natural was formed and created in that initial singularity, and it spread out. Now, if evolution is true, and if there is no creator, right? If atheism is true, there is no God. What guided the universe? Why do we have such a finely tuned universe? Why do we have the laws of mathematics, the laws of gravity, the laws of physics? Why do we have, laws of thermodynamics? Why do we have all these laws, right? And all these, cosmological constants? Why? Surely it's plausible, and it makes more sense that there is a mind and a guiding force behind this rather than just luck. It's just the way it is. I think that's a cop-out, right? It makes far more sense, far more plausible that there is a mind, an intelligent mind, guiding the formation of the cosmos. In fact, Richard Dawkins, he actually talks about the fine-tuning argument. He said it's quite convincing. Now, of course, he has an a priori commitment to naturalism, so he won't seriously accept it. But he has said it's quite convincing. But of course, he has a commitment to naturalism. So ultimately, he has to reject it, not because it's implausible, but because he's already shut off the door to the supernatural. And therefore, anything that we see, any data, has to be viewed from a purely naturalistic perspective. Now, is that logical? I don't think so. Perhaps the Apostle Paul is right when he says in Romans that the unbelievers suppress the truth. They know deep, deep down there's a creator. They can see it through the creation, but they suppress the truth for whatever reason. Second is the idea of organic evolution, which is life stemming from non-life. Now, be honest. Does it make sense that life comes from non-life? From just a logical, even a philosophical perspective, can non-life create life? We have never, ever seen it. And despite all the many, many years of research and millions of dollars invested into origin of life research, we are absolutely nowhere near, no idea how somehow life started from the primordial soup. Because this is what, probably the most common evolutionary theory for the cause of life is that some time ago in the distant past, when there was different conditions and there was some kind of a pond and all the chemicals were in there, just the right amounts of chemical. No one knows what these chemicals are, what the amounts are, because there's absolutely nowhere near, the research is nowhere near telling us what it is. But so that's sounds a bit of a fairy tale to me. Non-life, bit of lightning, bit of heat, whatever the cause is, and voila, there was some kind of a life began, whether it was a cell, whether it was RNA, whatever. But does that make sense? Can life come from non-life? To me, that is just absurd. Hence, the absurdity of evolution. Now, I think everybody watching this video, and I think everybody around the world will admit that, certainly in this world, life brings about life. For example, people are born because of their living parents. The parents have a union and blah, 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 blah. Animals and fish and birds, they are born because of sexual reproduction. Life brings about life. That's, everybody agrees on that. So let's take that logic and apply it to the origin of life, all life. How did the very first life begin? Why all of a sudden is it implausible to suggest that life brought about all forms of life? That's absolutely logical, that life, a mind, in this case a created being, caused life. That is logical, it's plausible. And if someone tries to tell me that it's implausible and illogical, that's absolutely absurd. Job chapter 12, verses 7 to 10 state, "But ask the beasts, and they will teach you, the birds of the heavens, and they will tell you, or the bushes of the earth, and they will teach you, and the fish of the sea will declare to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind." Lastly is the concept of macroevolution. So this is basically going beyond microevolution, which is observable. We know this. But then it states that the natural selection and combined with some genetic mutations is important. These genetic mutations over time, over millions and millions of years, maybe I think I read somewhere it's like 1 to 1.5 million years for one genetic mutation to be, stabilized or solidified. Now, in order to get from one kind to another kind, that means multiple beneficial mutations over time, and somehow it's guiding life into something bigger and greater. Now, there's a few issues with this which we're going to look at. Evolutionists provide what they call as proof, or certainly evidence, for this macroevolution by looking at the changes in the family tree of a kind. This is done by looking at the fossil record, dating the fossil records, but also, whenever possible, analyzing the genetic makeup by looking at the genome, and then comparing the similarity in the DNA. Generally speaking, animals that are in the same kind, they are going to have a closer genetic makeup. So the logic goes, according to evolutionists, let's take, for example, primates, monkeys and primates, and then, of course, humans. Supposedly, humans evolved from some kind of a primate, like 60 million years ago or whatever. And they look at the body structures, they look at the differences, in the body, in the fossil record, and they also, certainly for the living primates, they analyze the DNA. Now, supposedly chimpanzees and humans have 98 to 99% similarity, but that's actually false. Even like Science Daily has wrote an article saying the myth of the 1 to 2%. In fact, more recent studies have shown that the similarity of chimps to humans is anywhere between 81% to 94%. So there's, depending on how you assess it. And that's actually, even though it's 6% difference, there's actually so much genetic, sequences and differences that it's really, really far different. However, why can't similarities in the physical structure and also similarities in the DNA, why does it have to only be a common ancestor? Why can't it be a common designer? We see today that master builders, master designers, they use a blueprint. For example, let's take cars, for example. I know cars are not organic, they're not living things, but it serves as an example. When we see the evolution of a car, for example, let's say a Ford car, over the years, this car evolves, it changes. But the basic blueprint is the same. There's the chassis, there's the four wheels, there's whether it's a long base or a short base, a wheelbase, and then all the rest of it is just small differences, how aerodynamic, what design, what the interior is like. But essentially, all cars have a very similar blueprint, like with the four wheels and the chassis and the body. Now, the body can be designed differently, but they all require an engine and exhaust. So the basic blueprint is the same. Yet we see over the years, the evolution of the Ford Fiesta, for example, or the evolution of the Volkswagen Golf. We see it. And then even within one car manufacturing company, you've got start from one car, then it goes to all these different cars. In the Computer History Museum, there is a chart that shows the evolution of computer programming languages. Now, when we look at the chart, we can see it appears quite similar to some of the evolutionary paths of plants and animals. And if we compare them, these computer programs, they branch off from a previous version into more evolved languages. Yet clearly, computer programs, programming languages, were programmed. There was a designer, there was a mind, maybe a team of minds behind the design of the languages. And in fact, the only time we see evolution in action is when intelligent minds are pushing and guiding the process. Now, That we see. Now, I know it's not biological, but we see it. That evolution in terms of technology, etc., there's always a mind that's pushing and driving this evolution. From a philosophical perspective, why is a common ancestor the preferred, in fact, the only supposedly acceptable choice? Richard Dawkins, who's an evolutionary biologist and an outspoken atheist author, and Richard Atkins, who's a professor in chemistry, have both admitted, in a video, that they will not accept any evidence for the supernatural, for God. But they will just dismiss it. In fact, they said they'd put it down to either hallucination or madness. Basically, they have a commitment, an a priori a commitment to naturalism. Now that, to me, is not logical. That's not rational. That's absurd. Surely we should let the evidence and the logic dictate our conclusion, not our conclusion be dictated by our presupposition, by our commitment to a certain point of view. What if this is the de facto position within the scientific realm? What if you have to toe the line in terms of evolution, otherwise you might lose your tenure, which people have, and you might be ostracized or ousted from your job. In fact, Richard Lewontin, he actually said, and I quote, "Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door." Again, this is not logical. If the evidence or the data points towards a creative, intelligent mind beyond humans, then surely it's plausible to consider it, not to just dismiss it. But it gets even more interesting. In 2015, at the University of Southampton, they produced an article called, "Is Evolution More Intelligent Than We Thought?" And in this article, I'm going to quote the article, they say, "Evolution may be more intelligent than we thought, according to researchers." In a new article, the authors make the case that evolution is able to learn from previous experience, which could provide a better explanation of how evolution by natural selection produces such apparently intelligent designs. So let's get this straight. The authors are acknowledging there seems to be intelligent, complex design in the universe, whether it's through the stars, the cosmos, or through the natural world. They admit it because it says apparently intelligent design. And they're also applying an intelligence behind this. What's more logical that where we see order and design, that there is a designer and an orderer? But no, it's evolution. They're applying the attributes of God to evolution. It's absurd. The article goes on to say, when we look at the amazing, apparently intelligent designs that evolution produces, it takes some imagination to understand how random variation and selection produce them. I have to agree, it takes a lot of imagination. To conclude, only one out of the 4 elements of evolution has been observed, which is microevolution. In fact, if we look at macroevolution, the development of evolution of kind, we see it in physical products that are made in factories, whatever. But there's always a mind, intelligence, a guiding force behind it. We never see that in life. Unless if we go back to the life coming from non-life. I want to give you a quote by Dr. James Tour, who's one of the leading researchers in nanotechnology, but also origin of life. And he says, the field of origin of life hasn't advanced an inch in 60 plus years. Everyone's clueless on this, but no one wants to admit it. Great scientists writing in the highest profile science journals are lying to you when they assert otherwise. Show me the chemistry of abiogenesis, he says. It's not there. So, be honest. What is the most plausible explanation for the creation of the universe, life from life, complex designs in nature, which in the fossil record appear very quickly and suddenly. There's no evidence in the fossil record of lots and lots of changes. We don't see that. Combined with microevolution. What is the most plausible answer? And if you think it's evolution, I think that's just absurd. So that's the end of this video. I hope you found it interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, like the video, and share the video. And remember, faith is not fairy tales, and God is real.